Are you an early stage founder revolutionizing the future of retail? Then you're in the right place. My name is Shah, and I'm an angel investor investing at the pre-seed and seed stage in retail tech, e-commerce, marketplaces, and consumer. I'm also the founder of Retail X Series, an ecosystem to help early stage founders in the retail and consumer sectors. Retail X Series includes events, a YouTube channel, a Slack community, resources for founders, and this podcast. In this podcast, I interview founders, investors, and experts in the retail space, and we dig deep into the tactics around key topics that early stage founders want to hear about. Welcome to the Retail X podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Retail X Series podcast. I'm your host, Sapna Shah. Today's episode is all about building a beverage brand from the very ground up. Today's guest, Pham, is the founder and CEO of Sen, a Vietnamese ready-to-drink coffee brand. Len will tell us about her journey through planning, fundraising, and launch. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sapna. Excited to be here and excited to share the Sen story.
Excellent. So let's start with background. First, can you tell us a little bit about you and then a little bit about what Sen is and why you started the company?
Of course, I've worked in partnerships in more than the last decade and was just really plugged into the founder space there and just saw this opportunity during COVID to do something on my own and was really excited. And I wanted to do something related to my culture, food, and like everything that I grew up with. And so I started Sen. It took a long time to name it Sen. Sen means a few things in Vietnamese, depending where you put the accent over the A. But it means morning, it means bright, it means luxurious. And so I wanted to start Sen to just highlight that culture of Vietnam that I find so bright and luxurious. And we're starting with Vietnamese iced coffee. And it's quite a journey how a year and a half later, we are here.
Amazing. Okay, so let's go into that journey. So starting with the planning phase, I know you spent a long time in the planning phase. You were fundraising, you were working on manufacturing, you were planning distribution. So let's go back to the very, very beginning. You actually raised money before you had a final product or any revenue. And you raised a good amount of money. That's incredibly challenging, especially for a female founder, as you and I have previously discussed. So let's start with, how did you raise money for a pre-revenue, pre-product company?
Well, I bootstrapped it myself for a little bit, but realizing once I got to the point where I had exhausted quite a bit of my savings and understanding that beverage is quite expensive to penetrate the markets that I wanted to penetrate, that I needed to go out and raise money. And I just started with friends and family. They knew that I was working on this for the last however many months. And I was lucky enough, those friends and family introduced me to other people and whatever. And so it was just my network in the beginning of how I started, just the first couple big checks. And from there, I was lucky enough to get plugged into a few VCs and really strong angel investor here in New York City. And yeah, I guess the word is just network, and you just never know who somebody knows and if they can introduce you.
What kind of investors actually resonated with your company? Because food and bev is like a very specific category. I mean, you hear a lot about tech investors, you hear about CPG, but food and beverage, I think, is just different than all of that.
It's very different. And I know that you and I, Sapna, have spoken off the record about female founders and our funding and how absolutely embarrassing it is at 1.9% last year. And so the investors that resonated with me were actually female, shocking, a lot of them. And so that's why there needs to be male LPs and male decision makers and male people who are handling the deal flow. And so my largest check in the beginning was a female, an Asian female. And so that's why when they say when you're pre-revenue, pre-product, all that, people are investing in the person. They're investing in the idea, if it's great, whatever, but they're also investing in the person. And it is easier. And people have said this, you've read it everywhere. It's easier when you look like somebody. They can relate. The investor can relate to another person. And so There's just a reason why there are more male, even consumer and food and beverage founders than there are women, because it's just a male dominated industry.
And I think that's really good advice, right? Because I do think that looking to find founder investors that look like you is very helpful. Now, we don't even need to go into the problem of there's not enough female investors and whatever. That's a podcast for another day. But as you went through this and you started learning through the fundraising process, like these people are more likely to be interested, these people aren't. Can you like maybe sum up one or two key learnings about running this early stage fundraising process? And maybe even tell us how long it took you from start to finish.
I was very fortunate that it only took me about 3 months from start to finish to actually close that first round. And I just went out to just my Asian network and went out to the people who I knew that saw the opportunity in the marketplace where Asian consumer goods were not being addressed and marketed to Gen Zs and global millennials in a way that heritage products weren't. And so that's how I went about it. It's just easier. Yeah, people look like you, but then also maybe they have the same background, they grew up or whatever it may be. And it didn't have to be an Asian person. It could have been like a Puerto Rican or a Dominican person that understood the opportunity in the ethnic area that I was filling.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, very helpful. Moving on to manufacturing. So this is like a really big topic, and I think we could probably talk about this for like days, but finding that right manufacturing partner early is really challenging, actually in pretty much every category, to be honest. But walk us through how you did this for a beverage brand. Like, how did you first find a manufacturer? Did you go through multiple options? Walk us through how you did that.
So I'm a sole female founder. I'm a sole founder, and it's very isolating. And Google can only take you so far, right? I was knee deep many of nights trying to find the right manufacturer, the right co-packer. The quantities that I was looking at, I was really limited to just 3 or 4 of them. And then okay, great. If I find these co-packers, I don't even begin to understand how I move product logistically, operationally, and all of that. And so there are quite a few like these brand incubators that kind of help startups with their infrastructure, with an ops team, with a sales team, and whatever support that you need as a founder. So I did sign on to one of those, I would say just for 2 to 3 months, 2 months. And they helped me identify the right co-packer. Could I have done it myself? Yes, but I had a Starbucks executive with 40 years of experience guiding me along the way. And so I think my biggest advice to people is really just look for those experts and those people who have the experience to really tell you, okay, you really need to think about this long term, and you need really the blind spots that you're missing. And so I did use one of those incubators, and it was great. And that's how I got such experienced information from everybody.
It's interesting because I think we see a lot of founders go through some of these programs, and some are more helpful than others. But this idea of kind of a Starbucks executive being like the person who really made the difference is interesting, because there are certainly people with corporate backgrounds who can be advisors or informal mentors. And I think that is so critical when you don't know.
And I just want to expound on like all these companies that do advise startups. There are some people have great experiences with them and some people don't. And I got what I needed out of them for the first 2 to 3 months. I think like a longer term engagement is quite expensive, because you're just paying that additional layer to that advisory company for these experts, right? And what I learned doing that was, and through my friend he's a co-founder at an apparel company, he said, Lon, look at the people who are doing it and crushing it and doing it well, and just cold message them on LinkedIn. And that's what I did. And that's what I did. And that's how I built a lot of my team around me now. That incubator, that advisory firm was really helpful in the beginning. And it gave me confidence, and it gave me like Beverage 101. But then after that, I was able to find the experts on the ops side, on the sales and the marketing side to plug into those roles that I needed instead of paying this additional layer. It's quite honestly quite expensive, an additional 50% that you're paying. And the work from home environment allows you to hire these really strong experts at a fraction, because they'll come on and advise you and be consultants for you. And so I highly advise that.
I love that. I love the fact that you even point out that with work from home, people have more flexibility to do these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And writing a great cold email, I'm sure or great cold LinkedIn pitch is part of your skill set now, which is great. Okay, so you started with, as you mentioned, you're starting with a coffee drink, but you're starting with 4 flavors, right? So how did you land on those 4 SKUs to start with? Why that many? Why not 10? Why not 2? Walk us through your process.
So when I started this, it was just an idea of just the traditional Vietnamese iced coffee it's a strong black coffee made with condensed milk poured over a cup of ice. And I knew that I could not just pitch these retailers on one SKU. And so as a result, I was like, oh, I thought to myself, well, we need a vegan SKU. And so what we did was what's the number one milk alternative right now? It's oat milk. And we're the only Vietnamese brand that's kind of what Sang represents. It's that bridge of tradition and modern day Gen Z millennials, and like speaking to the times and innovating. And so that's what the oat milk SKU that I started with. The traditional, it was just our proprietary blend of oat milk, condensed milk. And so I had those 2 SKUs, and those 2 SKUs were the 2 that sat with us for, I want to say, like 6 months. And my salesperson kept saying to me, you need an additional SKU, you need at least 3 SKUs. And if you could have 4, if you could have 5, that's great, because more shelf space is basically just a bigger billboard on the retailer shelf, right? And so we came out with a black, and the black has a hint of vanilla. It's just straight black, no milk. And that is quite delicious if you make a espresso martini with it. We've tried, quite delicious. And then, so we had those 3 SKUs. And when you go into formulation and you hire formulators, a lot of work gets done on taste testing and whatnot. And I always had the idea of wanting to do like a spiced latte or something, or a dirty chai. And we came up with our 4th SKU, and we're launching a pretty interesting digital campaign around it. It's called the Saigon Cinnamon Latte. And Saigon cinnamon being obviously a very strong export of Vietnam cinnamon. And so that is probably my favorite SKU now, that Saigon cinnamon latte.
So you've got these 4 SKUs. You are already thinking ahead to distribution, but before we even get to kind of distribution and those partners, how did you think about pricing and cost and working with these co-packers? Like, how did you land on your pricing? I think this is actually like a really hard thing to figure out what the right price is.
It is incredibly difficult to figure out. And it's we worked backwards, right? I looked at the strong category leaders that are doing coffee RTD, and what is their pricing, and who do I really see myself as a direct competitor? And so I priced it right in line there, and we worked our way back. Okay, do we have a business model here? If this is what do our COGS look like? And in terms of negotiating pricing with the co-packer in the beginning, when you're at MLQ, like minimum quantities, it's basically take it or leave it, lady. And so, but now we have a little bit more wiggle room and a little bit more, I want to say, bargaining power, that our MLQs are a little bit higher. But, I would say the biggest thing about pricing is, because there are 3 or 4 co-packers, and whatever industry your listener is listening to, or looking at different manufacturer or co-packers, just compare all the pricing. What may look like it is inexpensive in the beginning, where it might be a cheaper version or whatever, it might be quickly catch up on the back end because of all these hidden fees. So having an expert like I did just look at those contracts and look like, okay, well, they didn't list this fee, they didn't do that. And so just being aware of all the what might be around the corner. And that is where, starting back to what you saying, like I said, like having an expert with experience to guide me there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I think pricing is super challenging, and I totally get the no bargaining power in the beginning. And then how did you think about packaging? Because you knew from the beginning that you wanted to be in retail accounts and like on physically on a shelf.
Mhm.
That's maybe a different kind of packaging than a D2C only brand, although you do have your own D2C website. So how did you think about that?
There were so many cans in my apartment the first like first 3 months. I think my kids and the family were just getting to, it looked like we had a recycling center. It was way too much. But I really looked at the marketplace, whether it was like a direct competitor of a coffee or just looked at other beverages. I just wanted to see, and I took so many photos at so many retailers at all their refrigerated sections. And so I really educated myself on looking at the shelf and which ones were the category leaders and what brands were hot. And so when I started off with our designer, and goes back to naming the company Sang and everything, I told them that I wanted something bright, something vibrant to represent Vietnam and a lot of our colors. And then, but also like a lot of the brands that I grew up drinking, like these Vietnamese iced coffees, they're heritage brands. Their marketing is very old, very tired. And so I knew I wanted the packaging to just pop. And it was a person to say, okay, what is this? It looks interesting. It looks cool. And so making sure that the branding and the packaging was very current. And then also we are a Vietnamese brand. And obviously I live in America, and the product's manufactured in America, and we're launching in New York and LA. But I wanted a touch of Vietnamese, of Vietnam and the Vietnamese words that I grew up with. And so on top of my can, above the crown, it says Cafe Soda or Cafe Dan in the black. It just means iced coffee in Vietnamese. And so just that little bit of Vietnamese, an homage to my culture in the can.
I love that. I love that. And the cans are they are quite bright. I was looking at the website the other day. They're fun.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the pricing, how you found your co-packers. We've talked about packaging. What were some of the other key challenges back then? You did talk about sampling and tasting a variety of formulations. Was that one of the challenges, or were there any other challenges in that first manufacturing packaging?
Well, this was all last year and in 2001, and I'm sure everyone heard supply chain issues, right? And so whether it's a consumable or athleisure brand, like whatever, everyone was having supply chain constraints. And so that's what we would have launched 6 months earlier, but there was one particular ingredient that we were too small. MLQ was too small for that supplier to prioritize our order over a large order of a different company. And so that's what really delayed us. So that supply issue also affected the formulation, because we couldn't even get the trial size or a gallon size to send to our formulator to say, hey, can you try this product, or can you try this alternative? And so that delayed us quite a bit last year.
Yeah, I should have guessed supply chain. No matter how small your order quantities are, supply chain was a problem last year.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the distribution side. As we alluded to, that you knew you were going into retail stores right from the beginning. And I know that you got some agreements with distribution partners even before you actually were ready to launch. So how did you decide which partners you thought were the right partners for your brand?
I think whatever, if it's a food brand or athletic wear brand or shoe brand, we all have an idea of those partners that are just validators in validating the brand, and because they do such a great job of buying or positioning their products that they have. And so I did have a list of like key independent stores, that Erewhon, Cinderella, Fairway, like whatever they may be. I just had a really long list of them that I wanted Sang to be at. And when I met with my salesperson for the first time and I showed them, they were like, okay, you're not showing me anything revolutionary. every brand wants to be in Erewhon or whatever. And so it is also like working your way back from that list, he said, and who are the distributors that service those accounts, right? Who are those distributors that are going to pick us up? Because it is a dance of the chicken or the egg, which comes first, right? Like the distributors are not going to take you on unless the retailers are going to place POs with them. And the retailers aren't going to take you on unless you are signed up with one of their distributors that you use. And so it was this constant dance between distributor, retailer for the last 3 to 4 months. And I'm very fortunate. I have a super strong team that works with me we collected such long letters of commitments from really strong retailers that we were able to open some really key distributors in New York City and in California.
Amazing. And so you you worked with both. It sounds like you were really pushing on both sides, which I guess I had not realized you needed to do that. So that's interesting. What did they need to see, both the retailers and distributors? What did they need to see to give them confidence in your product? Like, how did you get them to get to know your brand?
It's always product market fit, right? And you're trying to differentiate your brand from whatever, because you're taking away an opportunity or maybe a money maker that's already on the shelf, right? And why should they replace it? And so it is just getting that face time and getting that meeting and being able to, for me, to tell the story of saying and to explain the popularity of Vietnamese iced coffee. There's a reason why there was a TikTok trend on how to do the Starbucks hacks. And there's a reason why hipster ice cream shops love Vietnamese iced coffee as a flavor. And so just explaining the popularity of Vietnamese iced coffee, and then also just talking about ethnic brands and culture and representation now and why that's so important. And so once I got the meeting, I would say we had a pretty strong success rate of getting that letter of commitment, of getting onboarded with them. But getting those meetings aren't easy.
What is there a hack for getting any of those meetings?
I spend so much time on LinkedIn with my and so my salesperson said, I already know that person. I'm so annoying with my sales guy. Okay, what about this person and this? So the hack is, you just look on, let's just say Butterfield is the account that you want to get into in New York City. You just look online, look on LinkedIn, and then you're right. I got really good at the cold message on LinkedIn, whether it was a retailer, whether it was like a journalist or whatever it is, I found the message always resonated better when it came from me versus anyone else on the team, because I just was able to tell the story. And so I would just copy and paste on LinkedIn. And so it was a good combination. I would say like 30% of my meetings came from LinkedIn, and then the other 70 was from my salesperson.
That's interesting. And I think a lot of founders have found that, especially when you're early, the founder is the face of the brand. And people want to hear from the founder, and they don't want to necessarily hear from another team member because it's too early. You just don't have all the financials to look at. So you really need to believe the person.
Yeah, it becomes really challenging as a founder and as a sole founder, as I'm trying to be in every place, everywhere, on the sales team, supporting the sales department, and then on the marketing team, like DMing all these really famous and popular creators, right? It as much as everyone else is pushing and they are all amazing and we work collectively together, we found that it just works better when it comes from me, when you're such a small brand and you don't have Nielsen data behind you, you don't have strong doors behind you yet.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's now talk about launch. So for consumer products, not just like the launch of the day, but like the launch period is really important, right? You're building the hype, you're getting press. You have already alluded to talking to journalists. You're trying to build awareness on the consumer side and maybe even also on the branded distribution side. So can you talk about what you're doing to all of this successful during this launch phase, which I think you're still in the launch phase, really?
We're definitely still in the launch phase. We just did a beta rollout really on the website, and the e-com's doing well, but we'll be in our first store sometime in the next, I want to say, week in New York City. And so really fun and exciting. And so, yes, we're still in the launch phase, but how do we support that launch phase on DTC? And as we like roll out our really interesting digital campaigns that we're rolling out to support our Amazon storefront that we're launching soon here in the next 6 weeks. And so it's a lot of that. A lot of what we did was just building last year and setting up that infrastructure and doing that soft launch to work out the kinks on the website and with our 3PL and everything. And then now this year, it's the fun part of seeing our product on the shelf, and then a lot of the marketing ideas, whether it's events and content creators, and really just leaning on the Vietnamese community too, that I hope will support Sang and support us, because there's a lot of strong Vietnamese creators. And so, yeah, we have a lot of great things that are happening to support all the channels.
And you alluded to events, and I think one of the things that now that we're back to semi-normal life post-lockdown and COVID is that there are a lot more events. But have you found, and I know you did one, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, sorry. Have you found that events have paid off maybe in the same way as some of the social media stuff that you're doing, for example? And I think this is a question founders really ask, like, where do you put your dollars, right? Do events matter more? Does social media matter more? Is it better to work with those creators on TikTok? Where do you think all of these things land?
My CMO, who will officially be starting in September, he is just so amazing. And I ask him this question all the time, like it was January, we were budgeting for the year, everyone has KPIs. And I ask him the same thing, where are we going to allocate? Is it events? Is it or how much are we going to allocate to creators? And a lot of it is, he's been doing this for 4 years. And he's like, for quite some time. And he said, it is pretty much, you're just testing and just waiting to see what's successful, because it's really unpredictable, because one event might be really successful, but the next event in the same city and whatever it may be. And so we're definitely flexible with our budget and how we're going to do that, but we don't know yet what is going to be successful. And you don't know until I would say 3 or 4 months later after the sales, because there might be an initial kick or not, or fishtails at the end. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. And then finally, to wrap up, you've told us a lot of kind of advice throughout, but what's your one piece of advice that you would give to early stage founders that are starting something in the beverage space? What's the one thing you've learned that you wish you had known before you started?
Oh, that I wish I would have known. That I don't necessarily think this is just for the beverage space, but the amount of time that you will spend fundraising I had no idea. I mean, it requires a lot of time, because beverage, as anything that any company or any startup, it's expensive. And so I would just say, as you're fundraising, to focus on that, but also don't let go of the day-to-day, because it is relentless, the day-to-day. And so I guess my advice is to balance all of that as best you can, because it doesn't get any easier. I'm just raised my safe, and then we'll go out for a price round sometime this summer. And so you're always looking into the horizon because you have all these things that you are working on but you need funding to support that. And so I would just say, just try to balance all of that. That's it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do the balance. I mean, it's helpful when there's a co-founder,
Yeah.
right? Because then you can split up some things. But yeah, for a solo founder, it's hard. It's very hard. That was it for all the questions I wanted to ask you. Thank you so much, Lan, for sharing your experiences, the Sang story. Really appreciate your time on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sapna. I had a great time.
And thank you for listening to the Retail X podcast. We'll have another new episode out shortly. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Retail X Series, check out www.retailxseries.com for more information, including recordings of past events. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Retail X Series. You can also learn more about me, find fundraising resources, or submit a pitch deck at www.redgiraffeadvisors.com. Thanks, and catch you next time.